Will in Puerto Rico.
Howdy.
How do you do?
Hey, Will.
Pretty good, thanks. I noticed you guys were looking for one good reason to believe in God, so I'm going to try to give that to you.
Okay.
Awesome.
So here's my position. I believe that anyone who is rational, logical, and reasonable must believe in something that is both eternal and uncreated.
Cool. I agree.
Like the
All
universe.
right, great. So we're on the same page. Now, as a theist, I call that something that is eternal and uncreated God. And that seems to me to make more sense than whatever it is you guys would call eternal and uncreated, which I'm not even sure what that is.
What do you suppose that it
material
is?
energy. So I have no reason.
Aaron spoiled it.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I have no reason
That's
to
right.
refer to material energy as God.
Yeah, so to me, so again, I'm willing to hear you guys out on what you think it is. The term I hear most often is some sort of singularity.
No.
But in reality, we really do have a very similar position in terms of origin.
No, I doubt that very much, because I don't have an origin in my perspective. The universe always existed.
And I expressed this to a previous caller. What we have in common is that we are both acknowledging that there is a brute fact at the end of the chain.
So
Right.
material energy,
And so
you can slow down energy to make matter. You can speed up matter to make energy. Both the unification of which was apparently in this singularity, if there was a singularity, which I don't hold. I don't have necessarily a belief in cosmogony. I don't study that. I listen to the opinions of experts, and I accept that the Big Bang cosmology is the best supported explanation for cosmic inflation, or for the evidence indicating cosmic inflation. But I focus on evolutionary phylogenies, and I don't actually care which explanation there are for cosmic inflation, or if you prefer for the origin of the universe, or if you prefer for whether God said abracadabra and poofed everything out of nothing, which I don't believe everything came out of nothing, and I get tired of being accused of believing that I do. None of that, no part of cosmogony has anything whatsoever to do with the fact that we are evolving apes, and that all the scriptures ever penned by men are man-made mythology with no truth in them. Not even the existence of God would change either of those facts.
Okay, cool. And so I'm just trying to give you guys what I think is a good reason to believe in God.
Okay.
And so if we are...
yeah,
go ahead.
Can I give you one reason why that might be an inferior view?
Sure.
And that is, are you familiar with Occam's razor, and do you hold to that?
I'm familiar with it. I don't think it's a law.
No, it's not a law, but I think generally you would agree that when you're trying to evaluate one hypothesis against another, the one that, and again, it's the fewest assumptions, not multiplying entities unnecessarily, right? Is generally Occam's razor. So Aaron and I live in a universe, and you live in a universe with us, where matter and energy exists, and we've never experienced matter or energy being created or destroyed, right? So when Aaron and I suppose that it makes sense to us that maybe matter and energy is the thing that is the brute fact, we don't have to create a new entity, right? We are still working within an entity that we know exists. Any other God hypothesis has to add to it, right? It has to multiply an entity, and in our view, unnecessarily. Does that make any sense?
It does, but here's what I'm going to argue. I think if we both have a starting point, mine is God, yours is energy.
Mm-hmm.
What makes sense with the universe that we live in, with all of the design and order in it, was that there was a mind behind that, and not energy, which I think it's irrational to think that just energy would create everything that we have today.
And I don't believe
So
anything was created or designed. And the order that I see is incidental.
yeah, you understand we'll have that sort of a argument from credulity. Like you're basically telling us that you see some elements there that you don't feel are sufficiently explained by energy, whereas we do see that it's fully explained. So that we're kind of at an impasse when it comes to straight up credulity. Does that make sense?
It does. I would challenge you and push back a little bit that you could just make make it make sense that you just have energy, and now we have this entire universe with incredible order and
Except that the order is not
everything works.
incredible. There's
Yeah, I was going to say what part of
places
the
where there's
order what part of
yeah.
the order do you feel like doesn't come from naturalistic laws?
Yeah.
I think if all of the minds in the world worked together but had to start from scratch, we could not design this universe.
That,
We
but that,
are
but that's
we are
that's
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 because
not
the
that's
universe
not
wasn't designed.
yeah, that doesn't really tell us, like, that doesn't answer my question in any way. The question was what order do you see that requires supernatural
Yeah.
intervention?
all of it, everything.
Okay.
Okay, so
So
you're just straight. So you think that every time that two hydrogen molecules combine with an oxygen molecule, God's actively like doing something there?
No, but I don't even see where we would get atoms from energy.
Would you
It doesn't make sense.
what do you think
here's
atoms
the problem I
are?
have with this argument.
Go
Ultimately, the
ahead.
believer wants to come back down to they go back to the murky past of things that even the most expert people will sometimes say, you know what, this is as far as we know. You know, we got good information for this point, but there's still stuff that we don't know. Okay, well, there's something we don't know. If you go back far enough, then there's something you don't know, and then you can pretend as if we don't already know things that we do, like that everything that we know about supposedly know about our deities and such that come from our collective scriptures that all include stories that we know to be false. So we're going to talk about the Big Bang as if we think that there was still a global flood, or as if we still think that there was an Adam and Eve. Those stories are false. Job having his conversation with God, that's absolutely false. There's no truth to any of that. There was no Exodus, there was no Tower of Babel, none of it. So I can't get it. Doesn't matter what the beginning of the universe was. If there was a beginning of the universe, no Adam and Eve. Bible is wrong. Start with Bible is wrong, and then try to go figure out what's right.
Well, there's a lot of evidence for the things that you just said are wrong. So I'd have to disagree with you there.
Well, I would have to prove the point then, because I'm not wrong here. There was no Adam and Eve. The Garden of Eden is just a fable that's adapted from elder mythology, and we know which myths were involved that added certain tropes. There was no Tower of Babel. We know what that story is about. We know what the kernel of truth between the Noah's flood is, and it's not what Christians make it out to be. There was no global flood. That's absolutely certain. And the Exodus is just not supported mathematically or by any evidence. Even rabbinic scholars admit that now. Historians admit that Moses never existed. Bible scholars don't believe much of the Bible at all. The Pentateuch, just right out. Book of Job, nope, not that either. And a whole bunch else.
This is just out of curiosity, do you believe that Mars was once covered in water?
I think that there's indications that Mars still has water. I don't know if it was covered. I think that there was
How
there was
much
a there was
water?
a sighting of liquid water on Mars at one point, a
Yeah, they
small
actually
amount.
there's a relatively new paper out about there may well be liquid water still on Mars today.
Yeah, it's
Are
just
you
got to
trying
get
to
the matter of right
are you
timing and
going
stuff.
to the are you going to the creation idea that we can believe a flood on Mars, but we can't believe a flood on
Yeah,
Earth?
yeah,
Is that where you're going?
yeah.
Yeah,
That
no.
is where I'm
Well,
going. Yeah.
no one thinks there's a flood on Mars.
Okay. No one thinks that it was like a vast majority of it was covered by water.
No,
No, not really.
I mean, there's no
The
reason to think that.
the
Mars may have
the
been may have been a vital planet once upon a time, but then there was apparently there was a planetary cataclysm that set off its four supervolcanoes, and Mars being as tiny as it is, the planet literally bled to death, which is why you don't have a magnetosphere anymore. Mars can no longer support life.
But also, I'm curious. Let's say let's Aaron I said, no, what we both totally believe that Mars was 100% covered with water one day. Let's suppose we did. I don't get the relevance.
Yeah.
It would just be funny to me that we do have evidence that the Earth was covered in water, and it still is a vast majority of it covered in water. It would just be funny to me to think that Mars possibly was, and then denying completely the
So yeah,
possibility that the Earth was
I'll
covered.
grant that we have evidence that the Earth is still today, the surface of the Earth is mostly covered in water. Yeah, I'll grant you that.
Do we
and
have fossilized seashells on the highest mountain ranges?
Yes, we do, because 34 million years ago, the subcontinent of the Indian subcontinent, which is the island continent of Pakistan and India, was on a tectonic plate moving northward until it crashed into Eurasia, which forced what was the seabed between them to become the Himalayas. And that collision is still ongoing, so that the Himalayas are still rising at an inch or so a year, or I think maybe it's 2 centimeters a year, something like that. So yeah, we still have that measurable rise, and so we have the fossils between these two, and then we also have fossils on the Indian subcontinent that were not mixed with the Eurasian fossils until after that collision, which also closed off the Tethys Sea, and thus changed our previously tropical environment, which was a horizontal equatorial flow. But when that closed up, when India hit Eurasia, it also raised tectonic plates, sealing off the entirety of the Tethys Sea. And so now the flow of the oceans goes from the poles up and down. And that caused a cooling of the planet, which brought in what we call the Ice Age.
Okay, now I was referring to all mountain ranges in the world.
Well, that doesn't make any sense, because no, we don't have seashells on the top of all mountain ranges. Not everywhere was underwater. Different places were. The biggest mountain in Texas, for example, is a coral reef. So imagine 2,000 foot of coral reef, and if I remember correctly, it's Permian. Well, I may be mistaken about that. No, the Permian is slightly off of that. But anyway, there's a coral reef that requires, in order for coral to grow at its maximum speed, you have to have calm waters for a long time, and you cannot have an inundation in a year, a global catastrophe. Coral will not grow in that. You have to have calm seas, plenty of sunlight, clear water, all of that, for it to grow the little bit that it grows every year. And here we have a mountain 2,000 feet high made of coral, which means that Texas was underwater for a hell of a long time. And we have other indications in geology that show that there was a division at one point. The United States of North America was divided in half by the Western Interior Seaway, and during that time, Texas, the entirety of it, was underwater, but most of Oklahoma was not. So not every mountain everywhere was underwater. I've been to a Cretaceous beach, which is right at the border of these, where the Western Interior Seaway came into its furthest encroachment. And you can see there's a river that cut all the way through the strata, so that you can see this. When you get to that level of strata, you've got all of these ammonite shells, thousands and thousands of ammonite shells that wash up in the shore and accumulate on top of each other, so that you can tell you've got mixtures of sand, you've got all of the things that you would find in beach. And then further into Oklahoma, at the same level, then all of your fossils are terrestrial. You go into Texas at the same strata, and now they're all marine. And we've seen all over geostratigraphy shows advancing and retreating beaches. There's ways that you can see in the different layers. At this point, the beach is up here. At this point, it's up here. And then at this other point, the beach begins to recede again.
Again, this could be wrong. This is a point of contention now between us, but I've been told that there are fossilized marine fossils on every mountain range in the world. I
Yeah,
grew up in
creationists lie to you a
Colorado, and I
lot.
can tell you, well, I
Creationists
can
lie a
tell you,
lot.
well, okay, well, we should look into it, but I can tell you, I grew up in Colorado, and there
Hmm.
are marine fossils in the Rocky Mountains.
Yeah, you
And
can have, because there's other issues with Colorado. For example, what are you doing back there? Okay, I have a dog behind me making noise. North America didn't always look like this. Western Colorado, or excuse me, Western California and Oregon weren't always here. That was an island chain that came in from the Pacific and then collided into the rest of it. Arizona was beachfront property. The Grand Canyon was underwater twice, if I remember correctly. It was twice underwater. Then it rose up, becomes dry land again, and goes back down under the water. And so you have it at advancing levels. Now you've got all marine fossils again, and then back up where you have terrestrial fossils again, and it alternates like that. And then this is where you get the Rocky Mountains, where they have this collision. I forget what they called that term, that raises the Rocky Mountains up. So whatever marine fossils
subduction, is that what you mean?
may have existed as part of the Western Interior Seaway, for example. Or no, because we're talking about earlier now. I forget about what it was before. It was in the Paleozoic. I forget what the situation was. I'm sorry, I don't have notes in front of me. I'm just doing this off the top of my head.
No, it's okay. It does sound like maybe we're close to being on the same page again, because we're talking about areas that we've never experienced
Will,
being underwater. You're saying they were underwater.
Yeah, Will, you're understanding that no scientist who denies a flood is confounded about the marine fossils you're talking about.
Yeah, and the other thing is that not all mountain ranges were ever underwater. Some were. Some were pushed up by different tectonic plates, uplifts, upheavals, but not everywhere. Some places were always dry land.
Can you give me an example of that? I can go look to see if they've ever found marine fossils there.
There was a place in central Arkansas where there was it was a chain of islands that always were. There was other places in the state that were underwater, but some of the oldest land just never were. I was on an expedition in South Africa, and there's a mountain range there that was the Himalayas of its day back in the Permian. They were the tallest mountains on Earth in the Permian, and now they're folded over and distorted and everything. But they were always dry land. They were not underwater ever at all.
Will, are you not bothered?
If the mountains are in the area of Prince Albert, but I can't remember what the mountain range is called. Again, I don't have notes in front of me.
Are you, Will, if you're really impressed by the sea fossils, are you not confused and confounded why there's no layer where we find modern mammals with dinosaurs or humans with dinosaurs? Are you bothered by that? If there was a global flood and it created one mega layer where everyone drowned, are you concerned that we haven't found that?
I haven't looked into it that much. I just thought it was interesting for Aaron to take such a bold stance that there's never been a global flood, when we have a very difficult task on our hands, no matter what view we have, of trying to understand what happened in the past when we can't go back to the past.
I used to, up until a few years ago, I used to believe exactly what you believe. I was 100% on board with dinosaurs on Noah's Ark. 100% on board. And maybe you don't even, maybe I went further even than you did. 6-day creation, I was all in. Until I went looking to see, do scientists have problems with X, Y, and Z? And it turns out they don't. And a creationist tactic that it feels like you might be falling for is by using the search terms that they want to use. So, for example, they like to use the words bent rock, and they like to use polystrate fossils, and they like to use these phrases that creationists come up with so that when you do a search on Google, no scientist is talking about polystrata fossils. What's going on? Well, it turns out they call it something entirely else, right? Because scientists just as someone who's come out of it, I have yet to come up against anything, and I was struggling. I really wanted to hold on to my young Earth creationist beliefs, but it just turns out there wasn't anything that didn't have in my view, and at least as good an answer as what the creation scientists will say. So that brings us back around to your initial call, which is like, you're not giving us anything. You're giving us reasons why, if you want to hold on to this belief, maybe you still can, but you haven't given us anything that's like, well, your view is superior because of X.
Mhm.
Like, I'm also confused. Like, you don't seem to think that energy can become matter, which is something you said like 10 minutes ago, which is just like, that's super confusing to me. Like, we know how that
Well, hold
happens.
on. Well, hold on.
Yeah.
This is good. Now, this is what I wanted to talk to you guys about. So, what causes energy to become matter?
As I said before, some physicists have used the phrase that matter is slowed down energy, and energy is sped up matter. And if you
Yeah,
want to see
yeah,
something, if you want to see matter become energy, you're going to see you need to see an atomic bomb go off.
yeah, and that's
And I
the
don't remember
reverse of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So neither of us are physicists. So you're gonna get
Mhm.
unsatisfactory answers. But the fact that you haven't looked it up, to see, and maybe you have, maybe you just said, what the answers they give are unsatisfactory to you. Fine.
Yeah, I'm gonna make a friendly challenge to you. If there's a point of
Yes.
contention, a specific thing that evolution actually shows, quoted verbatim, right, from multiple universities, so that we don't just get one outlier, right? And let's get something that people who teach evolution commonly say, and that you disagree with, and we'll see if we can show that it's false. And then conversely, find me or cite for me one argument any professional creationist ever made that was supposed to be supportive of their position that we can show to be actually factually correct. The challenge there isn't one. Creationists lie a lot.
Well, that's unfortunate if true. Can I throw an argument against you concerning evolution that I came up with myself?
Okay.
And again, I'm not an expert in this stuff at all. Is it safe to say that if evolution is true, at some point there was a creature that did not have blood, and then through a mutation or multiple mutations, the creature then had blood?
We still have those creatures. We don't call them creatures, but yeah, we have animals,
Okay.
very primitive animals that show up in the fossil record and still exist today that don't have blood. That here's one of the things that confuses some creationists. When they want to bring up the argument, which evolved first, the blood veins, the blood itself, the heart. The surprising thing is that the heartbeat appeared before any of those things. And then veins formed later as the pulsation that, like, look at jellyfish and how they swim. You have this rhythmic pulsation, which is basically the beginning of the heartbeat. This is one of the oldest animals that we can see without a microscope. And they have these pulsations. Now, slightly more derived, let's say, slightly more advanced animals will have this pulsation that's moving material throughout their body. We don't call it blood yet, but it takes channels, and so those will become the blood veins. And so eventually, at some point, we have cells that have lost their nucleus, and these are literally blood. So blood cells have initially a nucleus at the very beginning, so that's just regular, biological cells being flushed to the body by this rhythmic situation, and then they don't have a nucleus anymore. Now they're literally blood, and they perform this clotting function, which not all animals have. It's just these more advanced collection that do. And then when you get into hemichordates, a specific subset of worms that are kind of basal to all vertebrates and so on, all the more familiar animals, they had a channel in what would be the main vein of their body cavity, that this channel has an opening in it that becomes the first concept of a heart. So heartbeat, blood veins, blood, heart.
Okay, so I don't even know this is a valid question, but how many mutations would be required to get blood?
How many mutations does the
Just,
average
just,
person
just
have every day? How many mutations is the average person born with?
no idea. And I'm not
128
talking
on
about,
average. And that's just what
okay.
you start with.
And
Now, when we talk about,
mutations are generally a bad thing, right?
no, most
No.
mutations are neutral. The minority is that you can have some mutations that are detrimental. However, those tend to be weeded out very quickly. And then beneficial mutations may have a preferential advantage for natural selection, but most mutation that goes on isn't affected by selection at all. Most of the mutations are neutral, which is why you end up with like how many 300 some odd species of parrots, and this is just genetic drift. It's not necessarily
What's
that
an
they're being
example of
selected. I'm sorry?
what's an example of a beneficial mutation in a human?
I have a book that lists several of them. If where you can look up my video on the which is it? I think it's the 8th foundational falsehood of creationism. But the book is better because there was a mistake in the video that I had to put in a note about, because I put in the wrong name of a particular mutation when we were talking about high altitude, the adaptation to avoid apoplexia in people who live in the Andes versus people who live in the Alps. It's a different mutation, but with the same effect. And so there's a whole bunch of mutations that we now know of that people have that are beneficial, and beneficial just means toward that environment. And there's specific subsets of people all over the world who have these certain mutations. One of my favorite is there's a PAX9 mutation which started out in Mexico, and 100% of the Mexicans that were sampled by this study had been influenced by the PAX9 mutation, which means that and that doesn't mean 100% of Mexicans, just 100% of the people that participated in the study. They had the PAX9 mutation, which was developed Abiogenesis, so that there's no third molar. So what happens with our evolution from the other apes? The other apes have bigger jaws than we do. We just have these little gracile, teeny. Our jaws are smaller, our teeth are smaller, but there's no room for the teeth in our tiny jaws. So when that third molar comes in, it often impacts against the other teeth and can be deadly, causing a morbidity that we would die from. And there's fossil hominids that went through that. Well, that's one of them. Then there's another one. There's a myostatin mutation that if you get a double copy of it, one from your father and your mother, then you will have twice the muscle mass of a regular human. And then there's I wish I could remember the name of this. There's a specific type of another mutation in bone density that makes your bones virtually unbreakable. Now, they're a little heavier, so it's a little harder to swim, but if you had both of those mutations, fucking Superman, right? Twice the muscle mass and half the fat, and your bones are unbreakable. And then there's other mutations that we know of I have a friend, actually somebody that I know personally, who cannot have a heart attack the conventional way because he has two of the what is it, aorta? I don't want to say, I don't want to get this wrong, but he has two of the valves where normally everybody else has one, and if that valve gets clogged, then you die, right? That's a massive heart attack. But he has two, so he's much less likely to suffer that. That's a beneficial mutation, and the list goes on. There's
Okay,
quite a few
so
of them.
okay, so I will watch your video. These things you're saying I'm not familiar with them, but I'm not doubting you.
Okay.
But let's just assume for the sake of the argument that what you're saying is right.
Okay.
How does that beneficial mutation pass on to anyone else?
Well, it's your children, right, may inherit the mutation if that mutation is present in the zygote or your gametes. And so when your gamete cells combine, what?
Do we have an example of that where we have a beneficial mutation in a human being, we have the exact same beneficial mutation in their child? I've never heard of that.
Really?
That literally every example Aaron just gave.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I definitely would have to see that, because that's something I've literally never heard of.
But how do you know that?
That mutation requires that you have to get a double copy. If you get a single copy, if your mother has the gene, your father doesn't, and you inherit only hers, you're not going to get the benefit. You have to have the copy from both of the parents, and then you become like this.
But
yeah, what I'm saying is
there's some mutations.
This guy who can't have a heart attack, I bet you his child does not have that same condition.
Well, this particular person, I don't think, has any biological children. But
I'm telling you, if they had a child, it would not happen.
Why? You know that
it's very likely. If he did, it's very likely they would, because
Yeah.
children
It's a
tend to
50-50.
look a little bit like their parents. They tend
Yeah,
to inherit
looking is
traits from
different
their
than having an extra valve on our heart. Like this
Why is that different?
again,
Oh my
I'm
goodness.
open. I am open to changing my mind, and I'm open to evidence. This is something that I just have never
You
seen
know
and
that
would need to
Look,
be shown.
look up what causes ginger. Red hair, white skin, freckles, green eyes, all of these are all mutations. And they are inherited by the young. And you have to have specific mutations in a specific order. You have to have it from like both parents as such. You mix almost anything with ginger, you don't get ginger.
Yeah, we're again though we are talking about mutations that brought us from
Huh?
energy to man.
But
no, but
now
is
we're
pretty
talking about
significant.
mutations that cause red hair and pale skin. That is a
hold on.
mutation.
Will, are you imagining that these mutations are happening while the person is alive?
Yeah,
When do you think these?
definitely.
No. So Will, okay. So this is a mistake I had. I thought the same thing. So you understand these mutations have to be either in the sperm or the egg that creates us.
Yeah.
Any mutation that
I
we get
did
as
not
an
know that.
adult.
Yeah. So
No.
our
So any
cells
mutation
go
we have
through
is yeah. Go ahead.
our cells
Are you?
go through a number every time the cell replicates, they run the risk of doing more mutations. If the gamete cell has a mutation, you may not have experienced this trait yourself, but if that mutation occurs in a gamete cell, which then combines with the female, right, and so now you've got the zygote, and it bears that mutation, then that offspring has that trait that you yourself don't have.
Like we can't.
So
The mutations Aaron was talking about can't happen when you're a child or an adult or whatever. It has to happen in the sperm or the egg.
Yep.
So that's why that's how every cell in your body gets that, and that's when you make a sperm or an egg that you are just necessarily you can't help but pass that along to your child because every cell in your body has the same DNA.
okay, so where just pardon my ignorance here, where are these mutations coming from before we have even sperm and egg in existence?
Every cell
So
of your body replicates. When they replicate, the DNA strands in those individual cells are rewritten, and there are a handful of different things that cause mutations in the replication. There's it's set up so that it should be completely perfect, but issues do happen from external and interior reasons. And there's missense and nonsense and duplication, and there's I'm forgetting all the names of the different types of mutation right now, but there's a
right,
handful of different ones, and those are just point mutations. There's also mutations that can swap whole vast areas of DNA, just like copy whole pages of a book into the wrong place, or duplicate whole pages, because those types of mutations happen too. And usually they don't have a profound effect, but there are some that we positively identified where the specific type of mutation was involved that created this other feature or ability. And they can be as simple as a point mutation to do that. But then
and
when
aren't
the when that mutation happens in the cell, if it is, as Paul said, if it's in a gamete cell, you never had that ability that mutation promises, but your offspring would.
and Arn mentioned
And so
earlier up
we
front, on average each cell gets a human cell is about 120 genes off of whatever our baseline is. That's just the way it works. So every sperm that you make is going to have roughly 120 mutations
Well,
off of the.
that's when they're combined. When sperm and egg
Oh, so it's
in the
60.
zygote,
Let's so
yeah, that's
60 or
128 mutations per on
so
average.
so every sperm that's being made has a roughly 60 variations.
Yeah.
So that's how that happens.
yeah,
And
and
most
and
of the
again,
time with
I'm
population genetics, most of the time mutations in a large interbreeding population, mutations have very little chance of it being expressed because of the parent gene pool has a tendency to inhibit or restrict new variants. But smaller populations, much more likely. So if you take a large population, you take a small isolated group from that, set them aside in isolation somewhere, then after several generations, you'll be able to tell which group they came from, because the smaller group is going to have unique identifying features that the larger parent group doesn't have, because they have more likely expression.
Galapagos Islands.
Yeah, that's one example. There's several. Yeah.
Well, I do wish I understood this stuff more, but this is not my area of expertise. I just think you guys are going to have a very difficult time convincing the masses that just energy by itself is ultimately responsible for the world that we live in. And I think you'll have to appeal to things that would probably fall into the definition of a miracle in order to
Well,
make that
I don't
work.
see that. I mean, I've had the good fortune of speaking with a number of physicists and such, and then I can think of a few who argue for the eternity of the universe, who say that, like Sean Carroll, for example, that says it's not just material energy. That there's also like the only way that you could understand this is in terms of universal wave function, so that has to be eternal as well. So there's a number of things about this. Nowhere ever do we come up with Bible stories. That we just start with that being wrong because that's wrong. That remains wrong no matter what the origin, if there is an origin of the universe is. Bible's still wrong.
At some point, it was going to be a very uphill climb to convince people that the Earth revolved around the sun. And at some point, it was a very uphill climb to believe that the Earth was round. You know, the fact that a lot of people are resistant to new information doesn't make the new information wrong in any way.
That's true. I think mainstream science, including both of you, probably believe things have happened in the past that we really have no strong evidence for, meaning we've never witnessed it happen like that before. And I don't see that as much different than you guys giving us a hard time for believing in miracles.
I don't believe anything for which I don't have strong evidence.
Yeah, you're making an epistemological error that a witness is somehow a beneficial.
I can show you the truth of every position I hold.
What about abiogenesis?
Well, that's a long conversation, but if you want it, we got it.
And also, do you accept that at one point there wasn't life?
Yes.
And that now there is life?
Yep. The difference between us here is you think it happened magically. I think it happened naturally. And I have dozens of peer-reviewed biochemical studies showing different aspects of the development of life. Because it wasn't instantaneous. It's a multi-stage process, and we know what many of those stages were now.
Yeah, but
biology is just chemistry.
We've never seen it happen.
That's what I was identifying.
It's not like you pour powder into a blender and then it comes out a rabbit. Life is complicated. So the explanation for the origin of life is extremely complicated. If evolution is giving you trouble, abiogenesis is going to confuse the fuck out of you. There's a lot to it.
I'm just trying to say
most of it. It'd be easier to start with evolution first. Learn how to walk before you run.
Yeah, I'm just trying to say that this idea that life came from non-living matter has never been observed. It doesn't make any sense.
You're saying a magic imaginary man going abracadabra has been observed?
No, I'm trying to say there's a similarity here where you guys.
I can show you different aspects of the origin of life has been observed directly in the lab. Many different stages of that.
I just hear atheists give us a hard time for saying that they've never witnessed a miracle, and I'm just saying there's a similarity here.
Okay, I'm saying there's not. I can show you the truth of every position I hold, including that one.
Well, I know. Yeah, but not every step, not every stage of abiogenesis.
So you're aware that mayflies live 24 hours, right? Or So, in your view, a mayfly should never believe that houses are constructed because no house has ever been constructed in their lifetime.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying both sides. One side tries to act like everything is testable, repeatable, and we have evidence for it all. But that's just
we do have evidence for it all. Yes,
but repeatable. So you're misunderstanding. So you're making the same. You're making the same arguments I would have made just a few years ago. That's what is a little bit frustrating, or also encouraging. Science doesn't actually care about repeatability in the way that you think it does. What science cares about is making accurate predictions. So the notion that you've got from Ken Ham or however this all came from, that repeatable in a lab is what science is going after. No, Science wants to predict data that they will find in the future. That's all that it cares about. So you actually will probably need to readjust if you care. You don't have to care, but if you wanted to care about understanding what Aaron and I and other mainstream scientists believe, you will need to adopt the fact that we don't, just like we don't think something came from nothing, we don't think that repeatability is some kind of feature of science.
Yeah. We can see
Okay, that's
if you
fair.
saw boot prints in the new fallen snow wandering up to your daughter's window and they don't walk away, or if they do walk away, it doesn't matter. Either way, you weren't there to see the person, but
Right.
someone walked there. There was no witnesses. Someone walked there. The evidence indicates that.
And I would never believe that the snowflakes falling just happened to create that pattern either.
And the fact that you think that's analogous to evolution means that you're where I was at in my journey not too long ago, and basically not understanding what evolution wants to say. And unfortunately, that's just more. You're not steel manning. Like, you think you're believing the version of evolution that creationists have taught you what evolution was, and I was the same way. And I'm not talking down because I'm an idiot when it comes to this stuff. But
No,
you're just,
that is accurate. What you're saying is accurate.
so yeah. So if you wanted to, you could go back and you could educate yourself on what the actual scientists say, what claims they do make on their own without the filter of the creationist, and then have a problem with those. That's certainly a great conversation to have. But right now, we're basically arguing with you. You've been told things that aren't what we really believe. So it's a bit of a butting head situation.
All right, well, I'll look into it more, and I appreciate the call, and maybe we'll do it again sometime.
Thank you, Will. Great call.